Music usually comes in waves, if you think about it, especially in England, but all over the world. I want to talk about a few waves, and in fact, one wave that changed everything. Think about it. In 64, 65, the first wave was probably Beatlemania. About 7 years later, you had glam with glitter and all that, Bowie and all that, right? Remember? And about 7 years, it's weird how it happens like that. About 7 years after that, if you don't count the Bay City Rollers, well, they were part of that. But about 7 years after glam, you had punk. And then shortly, no, that was about 5 years after glam, you had punk. And then the wave that changed everything, even stifled punk. What am I talking about? I'm talking about what The Guardian said was one of history's flat out weirdest bids for screaming teen stardom. It's absolutely and utterly exciting. What am I talking about? Ant music, Kings of the Wild Frontier, Adam and the Ants. Let's talk a little bit about this, some of the crazy stuff that went on behind this record and why this record was important. You know, Adam and the Ants, this was their second album. Actually, the first album, Dirk Wears White Socks, came out at the end of the 70s, went to #1 in the newly created indie charts, but it didn't cause the same mass hysteria that this did. This came out in 1980. Oh, sorry, my shrink wrap's coming off. This came out in 1980. Was actually the best-selling album of 1981. And in fact, a lot of critics and fans and music freaks might argue that this record actually changed everything, kind of stifled punk rock and got the attention away. In fact, it's credited of taking the attention away from punk rock and putting it onto a more new sound, amp music, or new romantics and new wave. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's dig in. You know, Adam Ant was in a band called Bazooka Joe. And in the mid 70s, actually, I should say mid to late 70s, there was another band that was hired on as an opening act. And you may have heard of this band called the Sex Pistols. Supposedly, it was the Pistols' first gig ever. But anyway, Adam Ant was in Bazooka Joe, and he saw the Pistols, and he thought, whoa, what am I doing? I need to do some of that. As luck would have it, he bailed out of Bazooka Joe, started Adam and the Ants. They got off to a promising little start there, but things, like I said, would blow up wide open in 1980. But before we get to that, we got to talk about Adam had met Malcolm McLaren, who managed the Pistols and the Dolls, at a party, and he really liked Malcolm McLaren. And Malcolm McLaren told Adam this one piece of advice. He said, if you want to be famous, you got to put your face on the cover of your record. So for the next record, look what happened. Changed everything. But first, let's talk about this. Even though Adam admired Malcolm, Malcolm was a fink, but it was a blessing in disguise. Malcolm ended up stealing Adam's ants and formed Bow Wow Wow. So Adam had to go and find more ants. And in this, he got one of his best kept secrets, or not really a secret, but Marco Perrone, his guitar player. He also had got Chris Hughes. Now, interesting thing about Chris Hughes ended up being in Roxy Music. And believe it or not, he was an ant, but he also helped write Tears for Fears, Everybody Wants to Rule the World. So Adam had his new ants, and within these ants was Marco Perrone, as I mentioned, who was a secret weapon. Marco Perrone, people like to say he's maybe a little bit of rockabilly, a little bit of spaghetti western sounding guitar. He actually said, though, he got his guitar sound from an Eno song, Needle in the Camel's Eye. He was trying to imitate that. And in fact, for an album that changed everything, Kings of the Wild Frontier was actually the first song that Adam and Marco wrote. Not too bad for novices, is it? Why is this album so important? Aside from the fact that it was the best-selling album in 1981 and it won a Brit Award, I believe, in 82, was it? It did usher in a whole new scene and a whole new sound, and was the groundwork, or foundation, should we say, for the new romantic movement. But what does that mean? How did that come about? You know, supposedly Adam Adam said he was tired of the whole punk rock thing. Things had to change. So he said he didn't like the aggro. He didn't like what it portrayed. So he wanted to do something else. And he was a history buff. So he thought, what would really work instead of all this angst and anger and buttocks? What did he come up with? Indians and pirates. It worked. In fact, you know, we would have no king of pop without the king of the wild frontier. What am I talking about? I'm talking about Michael Jackson stole his look. That's right. Don't laugh. From Adam Ant. Take a look at this. That's right. Michael Jackson had become aware of Ant music and the craze that it was starting, and he liked Adam's look in that hussar jacket. So he wanted one. And as rock and roll lore would have it, he called Adam Ant. And he asked Adam, where did you get that jacket? And what is it called? And what's the story behind it? And Adam told him about it. And he said he bought it at a place called Berman's in London. And guess what? Jacko called Berman's, and the rest is history, because we all know how Michael loved his military jacket. And it all goes back to Adam Ant and Kings of the Wild Frontier. Amazing, isn't it? It's really strange, the album, the best-selling album of 1981 that started this craze. If you think about it, there's really no discernible verse-chorus structure in it. It's really just chants and sloganeering. So that's kind of crazy if you think about it. And it's also interesting to note that the song Kings of the Wild Frontier was the first time that the Ants used that double drumming, which they, well, became their trademark. In fact, one critic had said, it was so distinguishable that one critic had said, there's nothing else like it. Let me read this. There's nothing else like it. Nothing else that has the same bravado, the same swagger, the same gleeful self-aggrandizement, and the same sense of camp. That was so true. And in fact, that critic went on again to say it was such a key album of the 80s. And the cover's iconic. You can't think about the 80s without thinking about this. And you know, I love this. At the time, you know, I got to confess. And this album was responsible of getting me to stop and put down my Led Zeppelin and Ted Nugent records and get into new wave. This was the album that really did it right here, kids, for me. But you know what else is interesting? What else is interesting about this is the album cover itself. So iconic. It just typifies the 80s. You know, interesting thing. This was shot, the cover, the picture, as you see, it's all grainy and whatnot. It was actually shot on a TV monitor when the band were about to go on Top of the Pops. They were backstage, like in the dressing room or the green room. And Peter Ashworth, the photographer, who strangely enough was one time in the thought it was a great idea to just, instead of photographing the band, to photograph the monitor. And that's how you get all that distortion and all that pixelization. But it kind of signaled in, right? If you think about it, a new wave, pardon the pun, that was coming in. And think about it, it was shot on a TV monitor. Think about how important MTV became with music videos. It signaled a complete change moving forward. Anyway, Adam and the Ants, they had 3 singles off this album. The original first leadoff single, Kings of the Wild Frontier, it didn't chart that well in the beginning. But after the second 2 singles came out, it was Kings of the Wild Frontier, and then it was Dog Eat Dog, and, you know, I can't remember, Ant music. They re-released Kings of the Wild Frontier after the other 2 singles had taken off. And strangely enough, it got up to number 2. It would have gone to number 1, but John Lennon had just been killed, and Imagine was at the top of the charts, and it kept Adam and the Ants off. Here you go, kids. Changed everything. Got our attention away from punk and into more glamorous and exotic new sounds. Double drummers, Indians, pirates, makeup. What's not to love? Adam and the Ants, Kings of the Wild Frontier, made me open my eyes and minds to new music. What about you?